Assalamualaikum, Mr. Michael Sugich. Welcome to Malaysia. I heard this is your second time.
This is the second time. I was here in 2007 at a conference.
How's it been your stay so far?
Beautiful, and the people are really beautiful, luminous people. I have to say, the predominance of women is very encouraging. There are so many women interested in these kinds of spiritual matters, and I find that encouraging. I like it.
That's a very interesting point that we may talk later in the conversation. The predominance of women at this talk and not men. But yeah, you're here on a lecture tour, on a talk tour, and you'll also be appearing in some media interviews. And also like some dialogue and discussion with local crowd. And also you're on the back of your latest book, which is called Heart Turns. So if we can start off on that conversation about the book, about Heart Turns. I read a snippet of it about the introduction about the book, how it's your journey of meeting people who turn around.
Yes, it's the book is on the act of tawbah. And in Islam, this has become slightly misunderstood, or let's say it's been a little bit Christianized, in the sense that tawbah is normally translated as repentance. And in the Christian context, repentance has a kind of an absolute connotation, that it's a fixed thing. Repent, and you will be forgiven, and that's it. You repent once, and that's it. But in fact, tawbah means to turn or to return. So it's a dynamic word. It's a dynamic constant. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "I make tawbah 70 times a day." This is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So where does that leave us? And the shuyukh say that tawbah is incumbent upon every human being, every moment, whether they're obedient or disobedient, whether they're sinners or whether they're saints. The saints have to make tawbah too. But the tawbah of a saint is different than the tawbah of an ordinary person. The ordinary people, they repent or they turn away from sinning. But a saint will turn away from forgetfulness for 1 second. For a saint, for a wali, for a man of great piety, his tawbah his sin is forgetting God for an instant. So he has to make tawbah, and so it's basically our default setting. We should be in the process of tawbah all the time. So what I wanted to show, the book is a sort of the overriding theme is tawbah, is the idea of repentance and what it is. But then there's the other sort of concurrent theme is conversion. And conversion is a huge part of the Muslim experience. For example, in the Hadrami tradition, the Hadarim spread Islam throughout Asia by mixing with people and telling them about Islam. And they have a tradition of doing that, doing business with them, being merchants, being upright, being good examples, and so on. And so the book is also about conversion stories. And what I've done is I've mixed ancient stories from the really ancient writers on the subject, like Fariduddin Attar and Al-Hujwiri, and the stories that are in these texts. And I've mixed them with contemporary stories. And the reason that I've done that is because in the ancient stories, they come from the tabaqat, or the biographies of the saints, which have, over time, been kind of sanitized. In other words, a person is a bad person, and he makes tawbah and becomes a good person. So in the space of like a page or two, suddenly he's bad and then he's a saint. There's no transition. And in fact, in conversion stories, the saint is, or if someone who is destined to become a saint, goes through a whole series of realizations and recognitions and so on. So the contemporary conversion stories are quite long, and you've gone into detail because people come to the realization about Islam and also the spirituality of Islam by a process of stages. They realize this, they realize that, they have this experience, they have a sense of the presence of God in some way or another. So there are all kinds of experiences people have, and it's a fun read because people like to read about sinning. Sinning sells. So you have people starting as I interviewed people and created chapters on people who really were not very good people at one point in their lives, and then who came to Islam. For example, one of the chapters is on a man named Martin Askew. Martin was a London gangster from gangster royalty. His father was a gangster, his grandfather was a gangster, his cousins were gangster. Everybody he came out of that, and he was a really violent. He wasn't a good guy. And he, through a whole series of events that culminated in him nearly being killed in a brawl, he came to Islam. And then he sort of went through all these different phases of being a Muslim as well, being a fanatical Muslim, being an activist Muslim, and then ultimately being a Sufi and that sort of thing. And his story is wonderful. And one of the things that happened to Martin, or one of the things that he did after he became a Muslim, is he went around his neighborhood and he asked all the people that he had hurt in some way to forgive him. And he said that there had been a guy who had raped a woman and had gone to prison for it. He got caught and went to prison for it. But in that world, that's a terrible, terrible thing. And he came back into the neighborhood in East London, and Martin saw him before he was a Muslim, and he beat him nearly to death. He left him, on the street. Years later, after he became a Muslim, he saw the man, and the man had one of his children with him, and he approached him, and of course the man that he'd beaten, was terrified. He thought he was going to be beaten in front of one of his children, and Martin said, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do nothing to you." He said, "I just want you to forgive me for what I did." And the man burst out into tears. So there's this incredible kind of alchemy that happens in that process that I wanted to kind of show in kind of semi-real time, so that you get a sense of that transformation. And some of the stories are very funny. They're not. It's not a somber book by any means. There's a lot of fun in it. And some are quite moving, So
yeah, on that note, you were saying, you mentioned just now, like people likes to read about sins.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like I read some of the comments on people who read your book, Heart Turns, and you get that theme. different comment, but you get a thing that there's some comfort in them reading the book, because like as our default state, we are sinners. And even the Prophet, Allah has forgiven his sin before and after him, and yet we say he makes tawbah 70 times a day. Now, but we were like constant sinners. We probably do sin more than 70 times a day. But the thing is, is it, like you see, there's a lot of stories of mercy that comes out from this book.
Yes, absolutely.
But is it, like you can look at it like, is it not a mercy that you sin? Because Allah says, if you don't sin, I will go away with you people.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's a hadith that I've included in the book, and this is one of the reasons I wrote it. Is in the previous book I wrote, I did a series of book tours, and I came in contact with young Muslims, and I was kind of astonished to find how insecure young people are today, because they feel that they're sinners, and part of it is because of the dominant kind of understanding of religion that we have today, and I don't want to go into detail about that, but that equates sin with unbelief, with kufr. If you sin, you're a kafir. And this is completely wrong, and but they think somehow that they're sinners and that they're unredeemable. But what they have to understand is, no, you have to sin. Allah created you to sin and then make tawbah, because it's a process. It makes the heart turn. Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said that sometimes a sin is the cause for knowledge of God. So this idea that I'm a sinner and that's it, that's who I am identified as a sinner, is not true. One of the great awliya of history was Habib al-Ajami, and Habib al-Ajami was a usurer, and in that age, being a usurer was horrific. I mean, now all banks charge interest and so on, but a usurer, he was a ruthless, unpleasant person, and he became one of the greatest awliya of his age. He surpassed his teacher, Hassan al-Basra. He could walk on water. He was an extraordinary saint. But the way he started out was horrendous, and he was an awful person. People would run away from him because they felt that he was so unclean. Yeah. And so people have to understand that that mercy is constantly present, and sometimes by sinning, you actually induce a process that calls down the mercy of Allah.
Like you say just now, sin is in the common dialogue, is a general dialogue. Is sin is you attribute sin to also punishment. Like you say just now, kufr, but also when you sin, you punish. So it's always like, but what is not, which is true, but what is not brought into it with sin is tawbah.
Yeah, if you have
sin, it's forgiveness.
That's right. And if you have tawbah, and if with the tawbah you have remorse, the sin is erased. According to the shuyukh and according to the commentators, if you have remorse, in other words, you feel bad about the sin, then it's erased as if it didn't happen. And this is in hadith. And the problem is people read these things and they don't believe them, somehow, because the Prophet ﷺ said, if someone makes a sin, to the heavens and repents, Allah will forgive him. Now, if the Prophet, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not a scholar, so please excuse me. But either that's true or it's not true. And people they've missed that somehow, and they've been given a kind of teaching which is a harsh, narrow kind of teaching which is wrong, and it becomes very extreme. I was in Birmingham in the UK, and a friend of mine told me that he was in a mosque and the imam was telling the congregation that if they didn't bend their toe in the prayer, that their prayer was not acceptable to Allah. That whoever, he had no right to be standing in front of people. But this is what's happening. People are getting teaching that is completely wrong. It's completely off. And it's our duty to try to correct that direction that's happening.
Throughout your journey with the book, you met a lot of saints, you met a lot of lay people. Your previous book is it's all about the saints, and then now this book is about lay people, and like you say, they are turning around. But in terms of going back to the old book, the saints, and you can also take the lay people. I mean, what are do you see any common foundational theme about these people that make them turn? That we know that this turning around is from Allah at the end of the day. Some may seek it, some may not even seek it. But do you see in your experience when you met these people, that you experience that there's a certain core character in these people that allows the breeze of Allah to change them?
Yes, I mean, when you're talking about ordinary people, there's one sort of dynamic that happens. With the awliya, at least most of the awliya that I met, I mean, most of the awliya that I sat with, perhaps not all, no, for sure not all, but most of them were from they were ashraf, they were descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were raised in a very pure way. In other words, they in the traditional way, they memorized Quran, they had all the foundations and so on. I remember I was traveling with one of my teachers, Syed Habib Omar Abdullah Muini Baraka, who was a great Hadrami East African scholar and wali, and we were traveling together, and I missed my wife, and I started thinking about women and all this kind of thing. And I said, when you were a student, because he studied in Oxford, and so I said, did you ever have shahwa? And he looked at me and went, no. It wasn't part of his makeup. Because he grew up in a very, very pure environment. So in that sense, many of these people were very different because they grew up in a far more rarefied and protected environment than we have today. For ordinary people, one of the common threads is a confrontation with death. That it can be sort of an internal one, it can be an event in one's life, you lose someone, but this is a very common thread, is the imminence of death makes people think. I mean, for example, our friend and wonderful teacher, Yusuf Islam, came to Islam through an experience of nearly drowning, at one point, according to his story. And so I've had an experience like that, which I recount in Heart's Turn. But in terms of the awliya, it tends to be a slightly different dynamic. At least the ones that I've written about, and the awliya that I've been able to sit with. And this is one of the problems today. We're living in a different age where everything is intrusive. It's very hard to get away from media. It's very hard to have the kind of pure existence that these people had. They were in a different kind of context.
So, on realizing that we don't have the environment. We're not in a time where we grow up or raised up in that pure environment or pure surrounding. Is that what inspired you about Heart's Turn, about lay people who are in this current world with a lot of challenges, a lot of distraction? Is that what inspired you, or is there more to it?
Well, it was more to try to address this insecurity that I encountered with young people, feeling very, very insecure, as if they were sinners and they were doomed to perdition, and they'd done something wrong, and they didn't understand that. But the book I'm working on now is actually addressing those issues. And the working, I don't know if I'm going to use this title, but right now the working title is Now What?
Okay.
Like, what do you do? Like, okay, I'm a Muslim now, or I'm practicing. Now what? What do I do next? What happens? How do I go? Because people don't know how to get from A to B anymore. They're just stuck. They're praying and they're doing everything they think they should be doing. But how do you how do you progress? And what are you encountering? Now what? What do I do? One of the awliya that I was able to sit with, Sidi Muhammad Sahrawi, who had 55 shuyukh in his life. He said that the sickness of the human heart is, what shall I do? And if you think about it, Islam is all about action. Ad-Din al-Mu'amala. It's all action. And if you don't know what to do, it's very unsettling, So that's what I'm working on that now with a collaborator, and hopefully we'll be able to present something that's useful.
Just going back on the point when you mentioned Ad-Din al-Mu'amala, if you look at the experience with the shuyukh, sometimes when we talk about this awliya and shuyukh, we just I don't know, maybe I represent a lot of people, we tend to look like their relationship with Allah, their zikr, their night prayers and all that. But you say like our deen is, if you look at the book of deen, the great book of deen, or the book of fiqh, the first few books talk about ibadah, your relationship with Allah, your prayers, your zakat, and then it's done. The rest of the book is all mu'amala, how you deal with people.
Yeah.
You see anything in and I feel now I've experienced a lot where, and I feel like I'm one of them, fall into that, where too concerned, concern is good, but I'm just focusing on, because we look at the suyukh and awliya and their relationship with Allah personally, and we would strive to be like that, in a way neglecting our mu'amalat with people, and then we start being nasty. Because I've seen, I've experienced people who talk about Sufism and then they double park for 5 minutes to go to the bank, and I say
that's kind of
where's your heart
point
then? Because you just create a whole mass of traffic at the back.
Right.
So you were talking about matters of the heart, but where was your heart when you want to park there? Your heart was just with you.
That's right.
So do you think, can you tell us experience of the awliya that you meet? How was their mu'amalat with people that you experienced?
Their mu'amala was beautiful. I mean, I often say to people, do you think that the Sahaba became Muslim because the Prophet was a great theologian? Of course not. They became a Muslim because he was perfect in his adab, in his behavior to other people, in his kindness, in his humility. He breaks your heart. And that's what the awliya do. You every single one of them. One of my shuyukh was Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad, and Allah yarhamhu radiyallahu anhu. And Habib al-Haddad, when I would walk in, he was partially lame because of an accident he had. But when I would walk into the room, he would go, Allah, Haroon, Haroon, Allah, 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 and he would stand up every time I walked in. Why? Who am I? I'm not anyone important. But he had this beautiful humility, and he was so humble. And when you sit with these people, it sort of dawns on you slowly and gradually that they don't get angry. They're only there for other people. They're kind. They're generous. They're patient. They have all these beautiful, beautiful qualities, and they subsist in them. It isn't like they have them one day and not the next day. They're always like that because they have no ego. The ego's gone. And that's the great value of sitting with the awliya, is that their ego is gone. It's done, you know. And when then you see what a real human being is like. That's a real human being. It's someone without ego. Sheikh Darqawi, Muli al-Arabi al-Darqawi, he said, basically his teaching was very simple. He said, you have to realize that the world is worthless and the enemy is your ego, is your nafs. Sheikh Muhammad al-Jilani, he said that when you make sajda, you should be zero.
No.
Otherwise the ego is there. So the whole process of purification of the heart is to let go of all of these aspects of the ego, anger, you know, of selfishness, of greed, and all of the bad qualities. You let them go, because these are all qualities of the nafs, nafs al-amara bisu. And that's what the awliya represent and realize in the way that they are. And they're all the same. I mean, they're not the same. They're all different. They're different human beings. But they have this same central quality, which is that they don't, their ego is gone. It's not that they don't have a personality. They do. But they don't have this ugly thing that we have, that we carry around with us, which makes us upset and angry and resentful and selfish and greedy and thinking about ourselves all the time. I was sitting with my teacher, Syed Omar Abdullah, Muini Baraka, and Habib Ahmed Mashhoor was in the next room with someone. He was talking, and I was just thinking while we were waiting, and I said to Habib Omar, I said, I don't understand how Habib al-Haddad can stand to be around someone like me. And Habib Omar said, Habib al-Haddad only wants to be alive because of someone like you. Otherwise, he'd rather be with his Lord. And that's the way these people are. They don't exist for themselves anymore, because the self is gone.
Do you think we have those kind of awliya in this age, or has the awliya, we have awliya now? I'm sure Allah has awliya at every time until Qiyamah. But has it, like, is it the same, or are we need, or you think it's dying rate, or we need to look at awliya, maybe like the modern day awliya is have different characters, that they might not be the kind of the same profile that we expect awliya and back in those days?
First of all, one should never think that there are no awliya left. Someone went to Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib, from the Moroccan Sheikh, and said, you're the last of the awliya. He was trying to compliment him. He said, never say that, because when the awliya are gone, the world ends. Everything ends. And in fact, Ibn al-Arabi had a vision and saw that the last wali Allah will be Chinese and speak Mandarin. And when he dies, no one will have belief anymore. Completely. I mean, it's like a visionary thing. So what's happened, though, is that people don't care anymore. They don't care about the awliya. They don't care about dhikr. They don't care about anything. I've told this story several times while I've been here, but it's a very interesting story. I was invited by my friend Shams Friedlander, who's written extensively on Rumi and the whirling dervishes and that sort of thing. And he's from the Jarahi Taqiyya, Sufi order. And we went to the Jarahi Taqiyya for the Eid prayer one year, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was packed. There were about 700 people in the Taqiyya, and there were a lot of young people. And I was ecstatic. I said, "This is fantastic, Shams. There are so many people. They're it's just incredible." And he said, "Haroon, there are 16 million people in Istanbul. This is it." He brought me back to the reality. We don't. I mean, you have this wonderful group here, but what? 50 people, 100 people. You don't have. And I remember I was walking with Dr. Mustafa Badawi, who's a great translator of the books of the Habaib. And we were walking with Habib Ahmed from a gathering to his house, and he said, there would have been a time when there would be 1,000 people with us. There were like 3 or 4. This is the time. And it's because the awliya are there, but the people are not interested. So they just recede, because they actually don't. It's a terrible thing to be a teaching sheikh. It's a very, very big, huge responsibility, because they're answerable before Allah for the welfare of their murids. And Imam Abdullah al-Haddad, radiallahu anhu, he wrote back in the 18th century, I think, that we are no longer in the time of the mukarrabun, the musabbiqun, of the people who are the outstrippers, the people who are of the highest order. Those were the people, the awwaleen, were great ascetics, so we read about them, how they stayed up all night and how they didn't eat and they fasted and so on and so forth. And it's just beyond the ability of anyone today. He said, we're now in the time of the people of the right hand. So the shuyukh today, they don't tell you have to stop everything you're doing and not pray all the time and fast all the time. And we're encouraged to have our families, take care of them, have livelihoods and so on. So it's a different dynamic. It's a different process that we're going through. And people get confused because they read the ancient texts and they read about these people and say, "Oh, I'm doomed." No, because the time has moved on, and we're living in very challenging times. We're living in a very difficult period.
We had a famous tradition that says that when there's 40 believers gathered together and make dua, one of them is awliya. So every time there's 40 believers gathering together, so you say throughout time there will be awliya.
There may be.
They say I have a friend who's a simple guy in Indonesia. We talk about awliya, and he says something very profound to me. He says sometimes people search for the awliya, but they forget that their home, their mother is the awliya.
It can be.
And some says so in the sense sometimes we try to seek something so far away, but we might not see. But also I know me growing up, I work a lot with programs with the youth. Especially the disenfranchised youth who are really not interested in religion,
of course.
But they're very spiritual people. I do see spirituality in them. It's just like you say, there's a lot of they don't relate to teachers or scholars these days, because and I would ask them what and one of the main themes that will come out from this youth is these people are not real. I want real people.
Yeah,
that's why I say, your book, about lay people, or even and I grow up hearing stories of great habibs who have shortcomings, who have blemishes, and they talk about it. And some of one of the famous, amongst these youth, some of them that I experienced, and it was very profound for me when I asked what was the best thing about Sayyidina Abu Bakr to you? And one of them said, the fact that he thinks he's a munafiq. That he went to the Sahaba and said, am I in that list? Is my name in that list?
Yes.
He said, it made him real.
Yes.
And all this while I feel like Sahaba is like they're walking on air. And I can't relate to that because I'm not that.
Well, one of the problems that we have is the historians, Muslim historians, have sanitized Islamic history. I have a book that someone wrote about Sayyidina Omar, radiallahu anhu, and it completely whitewashes his Jahiliyyah period, his pre-Islamic period. And it doesn't talk about the things that he did. And what people, if you're receiving teaching like that, then you're being taken in the wrong direction, because one of the great lessons of the Sahaba was that they were ordinary people. They were ordinary people who became extraordinary through the practice of Islam and the proximity to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. They were ordinary people, and then they became extraordinary. Sayyidina Omar was in some respects a terrible person before Islam. You know, he was noble and he was strong and powerful and scary and all of that, but he was a very frightening and violent character who came to Islam on the way to actually murdering the Prophet. That's what he was planning to do. I mean, and the way that they tell this story, because it's all too precious, and that's a problem now. So that's part of the reason that I wrote Heart's Turn, is to show how people can change. And so the first section of stories is called God Finds You Wherever You Are, and it's about people who were criminals. I have one chapter about a man who was a pimp, who became Muslim. There were. You can come from the depths of depravity and become pure. This is what Allah has given us. So this has to be, like you said, it has to be made real, and that's kind of the reason that I wrote this. In terms of the awliya, some people objected, a few of my scholar friends objected to the familiarity that I wrote about some of the people that were familiar, and I disagree. I think that the awliya are people. Abul Abbas al-Mursi said that it's harder to find a wali Allah than it is to find Allah, because we know Allah by His perfections. But how can we find a wali when he eats the way we eat and sleeps the way we sleep? He's a human being, and they're human, and they're frail. But the key thing is to just be able to discern the lack of ego, and this is just incredible. One of the awliya had a dream of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, in the dream he said, "Ya Rasulullah, what is the best thing one can do in this world?" And the Prophet said ﷺ, to sit with a wali Allah for as long as it takes to milk a goat or boil an egg. Just sit with these people, and something happens. It's wonderful. And so but you have to sit with someone who's real, not someone who's pretending to be that. And unfortunately, there are people like that around as well.
So that's the other challenge now, because I've also experienced, I myself experienced, people that you think, okay, this is like, this is going to inspire me, this is going to be my role model, this is going to be, and then, after like some time, you get disillusioned, you get like, like this is, unfortunately, I have to say, like, a lot of the, like I say, one of the things that the youth feel is not being real is, there is this celebrity status of of certain teachers, or even like influencer, they call it now in modern age.
Right.
Where else, and you see people turn to good, but also I've seen also time where because of this they turn away.
It can be, yes. We mentioned this. I mentioned this to Mullah Hashim al-Marghiti, who was my sheikh, and he laughed and he said, "This is an old story. It's an old story. It's people of false claims, people who are mistaken. They're not making a claim, but they're misunderstood, people misunderstand. And I think a lot of the problem is that young people want to turn someone into something that they're not, and they don't claim to be. You know, many of my friends who lecture and who talk, they wouldn't even think of claiming that they're something, but people turn them into that. You know, and it's a lot of this hand kissing business. I don't really like. You know, so it really depends on the person. We need teachers for sure, and many of the people that are circulating and that are known, they're good teachers. They're honest people. They're not pretending to be anything. But because of publicity and because of the media and social media, they're turned into something that they're not even claiming. There are people who claim these things, and one of my teachers, who was a great Sudanese sheikh that I knew in Mecca, he said anyone who claims to be a Sheikh Murabbi is a liar, because they don't make claims. They just are. No. They are what they are, but they don't claim it. Someone who stakes a claim, saying, I am this, I am that, I am this, be careful, because that isn't what happens, and then these people are held to a very, very high standard. And Sheikh Zarruq wrote that you have the right to know everything about a Sheikh Murabbi, a teaching sheikh. Why? Well, it would be the same thing as if you were going to have heart surgery. You really want to know that the cardiologist has been through the process and knows what he's doing. Well, you have the right. I don't have the right to know everything about you. You don't have the right to know everything about me, because we're not claiming anything. But once a person is in that position, you have the right to know how he goes to the toilet if you want. I mean, it's not where he gets his money. What's his behavior like? How is he with his family? And so on and so forth. Because he's making a claim that he can heal your heart. This is serious business. If you have someone, you give your heart to someone who doesn't know what he's doing, he can do some serious damage. So these people are held to a very, very high standard, and they need to be, and they shouldn't be offended if someone questions that. And I think that's a bad sign. If someone's offended, then already, what's going on.
And so I use that benchmark, and I say, like, if I were to tell Sayyidina Abu Bakr that you're a nifaq, he would say, no, I was worried myself. You don't need to tell me. Thank you for reminding me.
Exactly.
I've already checked it out.
Yeah.
So for people to feel offended in the first place, that people might say, oh, you might have ujub, or you might have riya. For them to feel offended is a bad sign itself, like you say.
Well, also, you have people who are people of false claims who say, I have the haqiqah, you don't understand. You don't understand the haqiqah. When you hear someone saying that, that's completely wrong.
So in reaching out to the people now, especially the youth, we go back to the first point that came up just now. Right. Predominantly, there's more women who I would say is being reached.
Shame on us. That's all.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think I don't know about Malaysia, so I can't really speak about the environment here. But in the Arab world, women are more educated than men. They have higher degrees. They have more advanced studies. That's one thing. Men are understandably focused on the world, because they have to make a living, they have to support their families, there's a lot of pressure, so it's understandable. These things are also, you find a lot of women in the Muslim world studying things like English literature or some of humanities, whereas the men are studying engineering and sciences and finance and business and these kinds of things. So it's understandable. I mean, I tease men, in these gatherings because you have this huge group of women. In the auditorium of the museum, I sat down and I looked up and it was like all women, a wall of women, and a few men, scattered around. But I think it's understandable. They're engaged. Young men are engaged in making their way in the world. And actually, it goes back to a story that I heard about a friend of mine who was a murid of Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad. He went to him when he was very young, and he said, I want the goal. I want fana. I want to reach the goal. Please take me on the goal. He said, don't ask for that. And he said, no, I insist. I demand it. I insisted. I want, And Habib said, don't ask for that. He finally insisted. He said, all right, if you insist, go to your wife, divorce her, say goodbye to your children, settle your affairs, and come back to me. He said, I can't do that. He said, then don't ask for it. Because it's a serious business. And women are in a different position because they can follow a path and be mothers. That's part of motherhood and being, being who they are is part of their path. Whereas men, they have to go out, and if they're not supporting their family, they're losing out. Spiritually, they're losing out.
No.
So I think that's part of it. But also, as I said, most people are not interested in these things anymore.
Now, wrapping up, do you have any last words for the viewers and for us in Malaysia that might benefit us, inshallah?
Well, I would say that one thing I think people need to constantly remind themselves of is that religion is for one purpose only. It's not about community. It's not about identity. It's about knowing God. It's only about knowing God. All religion is for that. In fact, if all religions realize that, the practitioners of these religions, and they started practicing that and looking, we wouldn't have any conflict at all, because people would be too busy trying to know God. And I think this is something that people need to remember. It's a very stark, simple message that religion is about knowing God, and we have a way of knowing God. You don't, and this is the way of ihsan. And this is why we need these sciences. We need to revive these sciences so that we can apply them and experience an intimacy with Allah. And this is where you have real happiness. And in order to do that, you have to abandon the ego. You have to let it go, let it vanish. People think, well, I can't do that. And that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that in modern society, we're taught that we should make the ego big and strong and amazing and fantastic and successful and whatever else, and this is the diametric opposite of what spirituality is. And spirituality is to let this go and realize that the world is passing. You're 20, then you're 40, then you're 60. Then if you live that long, you're 80. And then sooner or later, you pass on. And everything that you have and have done, the only thing that you take with you is what the goodness or the evil that you've done in the world. And so this is very important. And that would be my last word, I suppose.
Thank you so much, mashallah, beautiful. That relationship with Allah, that you say that's religion, it's all about knowing Allah. And in Malaysia, there's one Swami, very famous Swami called Swami Vivekananda.
Yes, I know.
He has a very beautiful quote. It says that you are for God and not for others. You are for God and so for others. And going back to our talking about mu'amalat, mu'amalat, ibadat and mu'amalat. Your relationship with Allah is not a relationship unless that relationship is for others.
Yes.
You know, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming, Malaysia.
Thank you for inviting
all the best for the days to come, inshallah. May Allah benefit your program, or benefit our session here. May Allah benefit the conversation that we have, that people get inspired by it. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much. We finish off with Statue Kifara and Suratul Asr. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله والعصر. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.